In a world where most artists go quiet when it gets uncomfortable, he turned up the mic, just bars, straight from the basement. Now listen close, because this is what silence usually hides.
Yeah, the people they won't leave. What is threatening about divesting and want a piece? The problem isn't the protests, it's what they're protesting. It goes against what our country is funding. Block the barricade until Palestine is free. Block the barricade until Palestine is free. When I was 7, I learned a lesson from Cuban Eazy-E. What was it again? Oh yeah, fuck the police.
He called it Hind's Hall, not just a song title, but a name woven from two realities: a building seized in protest and a child killed in war. Together, they became a message too loud to ignore. Macklemore didn't roll it out with a press tour. No flashy drop, just a mic, a beat, and a message that hit like a punch to the chest. But this isn't just about one song. It's about why that song exists, what it responded to, and how it turned a quiet moment of music into a global conversation. So let's start there. What is Hind's Hall actually about? In April 2024, students at Columbia University seized Hamilton Hall and renamed it Hind's Hall. It wasn't a random act, it was symbolic, a place already steeped in resistance. Back in 1968, Columbia University worked with a Pentagon-funded think tank fueling the Vietnam War, while also planning a new gym in Harlem with 2 separate entrances, one for students, one for black residents. Critics dubbed it Jim Crow, a symbol of institutional racism and segregation. Outraged, black students occupied Hamilton Hall and renamed it Malcolm X Liberation College. They weren't alone. White students joined in, protesting the university's war ties. Together, they shut it down. The gym was scrapped, Columbia severed its military contracts, a moment when student resistance reshaped institutional power. The hall was reoccupied in 1985 to demand divestment from South Africa's apartheid. Again in 1996 for ethnic studies programs to reflect marginalized voices in the classroom. And again in 2024, this time for Palestine. Students demanded Columbia cut ties with companies linked to the Israeli military and urged the US to stop funding the war. But this time, the name they chose carried grief. They named it for Hind Rajab, a 6-year-old girl killed in Gaza. It wasn't political, it was deeply human. It was mourning for the youngest lives lost. And when Macklemore released Hind's Hall, he wasn't just referencing a building, it was amplifying its meaning. But to understand why the song struck such a nerve, you have to understand the child behind the name. Who is Hind Rajab? Hind Rajab was 6 years old. On January 29, 2024, she was in a car with her family fleeing the violence in Gaza City when they were fired on near a roundabout in Tel Halwa. The Israeli military said the area was an active combat zone, but Hind wasn't holding a weapon, she was holding a phone. She survived the initial strike, alone in the car, surrounded by bodies of her uncle, her aunt, her cousins, and for the next 3 hours, trapped and terrified, she stayed on the phone with emergency responders.
حبيبتي طيب أنا يا حبيبتي رح أجي أخذك هلا عمو من الهلال عماله عم بنصك عشان إحنا نقدر نيجي ناخذك. حواليكي في ضرب رصاص؟ خديني يا حبيبتي والله بدي أخذك بس مش بإيدي هلا.
2 paramedics from the Palestine Red Crescent tried to reach her. They never made it. The ambulance was later found destroyed. When rescuers finally reached the car, Hind was gone too. It confirmed what many feared. She didn't die just waiting. She died after the court ended. Her story didn't go viral because it was unique. It went viral because it wasn't. Hind became a symbol, not just of a war, but of its youngest casualties, of children paying the price for decisions they never made. In a conflict so often reduced to numbers, her name broke through the statistics and made the violence human. So when students in New York renamed a building Hind's Hall, it wasn't just protest, it was remembrance. A reminder that behind the headlines, there was a 6-year-old girl, scared and pleading, whose voice cut through the noise, a child the world couldn't save but refuses to forget. The grief didn't just echo in headlines, it echoed in music. On May 6, 2024, as celebrities walked the red carpet at the Met Gala, Macklemore dropped Hind's Hall, no label, no PR, just a starkly contrasting message, a response to the war in Gaza and the wave of student protesters flooding US campuses. The video didn't use actors, no sets, no glamour. Instead, it stitched together a collage of real moments, protest scenes, pop culture clips, icons like Tupac, even fast food chains woven into a beat to reflect the contradictions, complicity, and chaos behind the lyrics, a visual patchwork amplifying the song's urgency. It opened with a nostalgic instrumental sampled by Anna Al Habibi, a love song by Feiruz, one of Arab's world's most iconic singers, transformed into something deeper. For Arabs around the world, especially from Palestine, Lebanon, Jordan, and Syria, Fayrouz is more than just a voice. She's a presence, a morning ritual, the soundtrack to her road trips, coffee, and family. Her melodies spoke of heartbreak, home, and hope, often without ever taking a side. And yet, she became the common language for a divided region. So when Macklemore opened Hind's Hall with Fayrouz, it wasn't just a sample. It was a cultural bridge, grounding his verses in the lived experience of millions and honouring a history. This wasn't appropriation. It was a collaboration with a culture in mourning. What followed wasn't a protest song. It was a reckoning. Macklemore called out the US government, accused Biden directly, the blood is on your hands, declared he wouldn't vote for him, condemned silence from celebrities, institutions, and fellow artists. In a time when the music industry stayed on mute, he picked up the mic, but he wasn't just one-sided. On October 2023, he publicly called Hamas's attack on Israeli civilians what it was, a massacre. Then, just as forcefully, he named what followed, the siege, the bombs, the blackout. This wasn't a pop song dressed in activism. It was activism poured into rhythm. And he backed it up, pledging all proceeds to UNRWA, the UN agency supporting Palestinian refugees, just as it faced mass funding cuts. At a time when governments were turning their backs, he chose to lean in. He didn't center himself, he centered the cause. And the reaction? Polarizing, praised by some, condemned by others, but impossible to ignore. Because this wasn't just about Hind, or Columbia, or one campus. It was about a pattern. Where a 6-year-old's death becomes just another number. Where calls for peace are treated like threats. Where demanding dignity becomes radical. And it dropped on a day that said everything. Or headlines fixated on gowns and galas. Rafah, sheltering over 1 million displaced Palestinians, was bombed. The contrast couldn't be louder. To understand why Hind's Hall landed like it did, we have to understand what it was responding to. The blockade, the bombings, the decades of silence. So now, we step back to the history that led us here. Let's be clear, no video can capture the full complexity of this conflict. The history is long, painful, and deeply contested. But to understand what Hind's Hall was responding to, we need to zoom out, just a little. This crisis didn't begin in 2024, it's decades in the making. Britain pledges support for a Jewish homeland in Palestine without consulting the people already living there. For many Jews, reeling from centuries of persecution and the Holocaust, a homeland means survival. For Palestinians, it's the start of dispossession. A foreign global power redraws the map and lights the fuse for a century of conflict. The UN proposes to split the land. 2 states, one Jewish, one Arab. Jews accept, Arabs reject. War breaks out. The fighting ends and Israel declares independence. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians flee or are expelled. Villages empty, families scatter. It becomes known as the Nakba, the catastrophe. Not just the moment of loss, but the start of a life in exile. And for many Palestinians, the Nakba never ended. It continues to this day through occupation, displacement, and denial of return. Israel seizes Gaza, the West Bank, and East Jerusalem. Checkpoints rise, walls go up. Daily life falls under military rule. Palestinians no longer just lived under fire, they lived under control. Tired of occupation, Palestinians rise up. Stones fly, streets erupt, and in the chaos a new force emerges, Hamas, a militant group and a political faction. A handshake offers hope. Israeli and Palestinian leaders promise peace for 2 states, but the promise never materializes. Occupation continues, the blockade tightens, hope fades, anger grows. The peace process stalls and fury explodes again. Suicide bombings, mass arrests, military raids, trust collapses, and Gaza caught in the middle, battered, grieving, and pushed even further from peace. Israel withdraws troops from Gaza, but not control. Borders remain sealed, the air and sea locked down. Hamas takes over Gaza. Israel and Egypt impose a full blockade. Electricity rationed, medicine limited, 2 million people locked in with nowhere to go. Gaza becomes the world's largest open-air prison. In the years that followed, it became a cycle. 4 major wars in just over a decade. Rockets fire from Gaza, airstrikes from Israel, thousands killed, Entire neighborhoods reduced to rubble, schools destroyed, hospitals overwhelmed. Civilians, especially children, bore the brunt again and again, and still no resolution, just more trauma, more scars. Then, the deadliest day in Israel's history. Hamas launches a surprise attack. Over 1,200 people killed, families in their homes, civilians at a music festival, the elderly, children. Hundreds are taken hostage. The shock is immediate, the grief unbearable. Israel responds with full force. Bombs fall, borders closed, fuel, water, food cut off. Entire neighborhoods erased, tens or thousands dead. The streets become graveyards. One of Gaza's last working hospitals is hit. It shelters hundreds, and in a flash, it's gone. The cause remains contested, but the images that emerged spoke louder than any statement, a symbol of how far this had gone. This is the world Hind Rajab was born into, the world she died in, and the one Macklemore was responding to. But that world hasn't stopped burning. Even now, as Rifle burns and UNRWA faces defunding, the siege hasn't ended, the blockade hasn't lifted. What began decades ago, displacement, resistance, grief, is still unfolding. Hind's name didn't mark the end of something, it marked the reckoning still arriving. But saying it out loud, that came at a cost. Hind's Hall didn't just spark a conversation, it lit a fire. Supporters called it brave, a song that didn't dance around the issue, walked straight through it. Critics called it divisive, some wanted it taken down. YouTube age restricted the video, citing graphic imagery, a move many saw as censorship. It couldn't be recommended or viewed by under 18s. Meanwhile, it surged on X and Instagram. Macklemore faced backlash from all sides. Some Jewish leaders called it anti-Semitic, others faulted him for not naming Hamas, saying the song told only one side. At the time of release, he was touring Australia where criticisms came fast. Jewish groups condemned the song as hateful, accusing it of erasing Israeli trauma and distorting history. The timing, just days after the Holocaust remembrance, only heightened the anger. And yet, Tom Morello, guitarist for Rage Against the Machine, the band that turned political rage into anthems during the 90s, called it the most Rage Against the Machine song since Rage Against the Machine. Because this wasn't just about the lyrics, it was about who said them and how rare that is. In an industry that usually avoids controversy, Macklemore didn't sidestep. He stepped in, not as a hero, not for applause. He used his platform to echo voices already screaming. And maybe that's why the controversy hit so hard. Not because one artist spoke too loudly, but because so many others stayed silent. And here's the truth. Not everyone chanting Free Palestine is coming from the same place. For some, it's a cry for dignity. For others, it's heard as denying Israel's right to exist. That doesn't mean protesters should stop, but it does mean we have to hold space for all the grief in the room. Because if music is going to help us imagine something better, it has to listen just as hard as it speaks. Hind's Hall wasn't made to comfort, it was made to confront. It joins a lineage from Nina Simone to Public Enemy, Feroz to Kendrick. Artists who use their voice not just to reflect the world, but to challenge it. In an industry that often plays it safe, Macklemore chose to risk something. Not to be the voice, but to amplify the ones already screaming. So what do we expect from artists when the world is on fire? Do we want silence? Or do we believe that they carry a moral responsibility to use their platforms not just to entertain, but to lend their voice when it matters most? Macklemore made his choice. He didn't claim to have all the answers. He showed up, not to speak for others, but to stand with them. Because in moments like this, waiting for the right time often means letting history's worst moments go unanswered. And he's not alone. Around the world, other artists are making the same choice. Watch my latest video to see how a song became a rallying cry for women's rights in Iran. And for those who want to delve deeper, all sources used in the video are linked below. Like, subscribe, and share, because using your platform like Macklemore did might be the most powerful thing you can do today.